There comes a moment when the soul tires of obeying, tired of pleasing, of conforming, of being what others expect. It is in that silent, almost imperceptible moment that something within you awakens and says, "Enough." That is the true beginning, the point at which you decide to live not as a copy of the world, but as the purest expression of yourself. Throughout life, we have been taught to choose the safest path, the one that pleases, the one that maintains harmony. But no one taught us to choose ourselves. I tell you, this is the most important and also the most difficult decision. Because choosing yourself is breaking an invisible pact with mediocrity. It's refusing a life lived according to the gaze of others. It's saying no to the character you created to be accepted. And, finally, returning to the center, where your truth resides. When a human being understands this, something changes in their way of being. They begin to see that much of their anguish doesn't come from circumstances, but from the constant attempt to adjust to them. Most people live in a state of war with who they are. They fight against their own impulses, reject their feelings, and try to transform themselves into something they believe to be more worthy. But what is dignity, if not the coherence between what one feels and what one does? When there is a distance between being and acting, guilt is born, and from it springs the restlessness that consumes the spirit. I affirm, there is no peace without authenticity. The human mind has learned to fragment itself. There is the self that lives and the self that observes, judging every gesture, every thought, every desire. This division is the beginning of suffering. When you try to be what you believe you should be instead of simply being, tension sets in that prevents you from resting. And it is from this tension that modern exhaustion is born. The weariness of living to please, of existing to prove one's own worth. But, contrary to what fear suggests, choosing yourself is not about abandoning others. It's about ceasing to betray your own nature. When you live in fidelity to your essence, the world loses its power to control you. The opinions of others become mere noise, and judgment no longer has authority over your destiny. This freedom is not arrogance, it is maturity. It is born from the understanding that there is no virtue in pleasing others if, to do so, you need to lose yourself. The one who chooses to do so begins to see the world clearly. They realize that many of the rules we follow are nothing more than habits disguised as morality. They learn that true wisdom lies in acting according to reason and the nature of things, without excess, without submission, without a desire for approval. This clarity is what transforms existence into a peaceful yet firm journey. And then, the inevitable question arises. How many decisions did you make today that truly came from within yourself? How many choices were made out of conviction and not fear? When this doubt emerges, the spirit awakens. Because realizing how much you've betrayed yourself is the first step to rediscovering yourself. Life doesn't change suddenly. It's consciousness that changes. And when consciousness changes, life follows suit. Therefore, before wanting to transform the world, look inside and ask, am I being true to what I know to be true? If the answer is no, then the time has come. The beginning of freedom is the moment you decide to stop hiding. And, in doing so, the silence of the soul transforms into courage. Life becomes lighter the moment you stop resisting it. Most people believe that relaxing means giving up, but true rest comes when you accept what exists, without needing to control everything. I've learned that there's no greater weariness than wanting things to be different than they are. This silent struggle consumes energy, undermines the spirit, and transforms life into an invisible battlefield. You don't realize it, but you expend strength trying to please, correct, prove, and fix what isn't broken. Observe everyday life. The worker who wakes up every day hating their job, but continues because they believe they have no choice. The woman who feigns tranquility while carrying a weight no one sees. The man who laughs in conversation, but returns home feeling like a stranger in his own life. They are all trapped in the same delusion, believing that living is about enduring. But living is not about enduring. It's about understanding. When you understand what you cannot change and make peace with it, something silent happens. A calmness arises, not as pleasure, but as a clarity that cleanses the vision. There is a difference between enduring fate and understanding it. Enduring is resisting in silence. It is suffocating one's own being to fit into a mold. Understanding is looking at fate with serenity, recognizing that it is part of something greater. Nature does not fight against the wind. It bends and continues. We, however, have been taught to resist, and this resistance is what distances us most from wisdom. I've seen people completely change when they stopped fighting against the flow of life. A man who always feared disappointing his father found peace when he realized his father never judged him. He was fighting against a voice that existed only in his own mind. A woman who had spent years seeking recognition realized she didn't need to be seen to exist. She simply needed to live according to her conscience. These small revelations change everything because they reveal what has always been hidden. The enemy was never the world. It was resistance itself. When you choose not to fight, your body also changes. The weight on your shoulders lessens, your breathing deepens, your gaze expands. You no longer need to defend yourself from everything. And it is at this point that the mystery begins. When you stop trying to control life, life begins to cooperate with you. Coincidences appear, the right people come closer, doors open effortlessly. This is not mysticism, it is natural harmony. The universe tends towards balance when you stop creating conflict within yourself. However, this state is not passivity. Accepting is not about standing idly by, it's about acting from understanding. Those who understand don't react out of fear, but respond with clarity. This is the difference between those who live guided by reason and those who live driven by impulse. One acts with intention, the other with desperation. And all this begins with a simple act of observing instead of resisting. Perhaps you realize that throughout your life, you haven't been living, but rehearsing, repeating lines, maintaining appearances, feigning control. But there comes a moment when the rehearsal ends and life demands your presence. When you finally stop fighting against what is, you discover something surprising. Life was never against you. You were the one who was against it. And this discovery is the first sign of freedom. There's an inevitable moment when, upon making a choice, you begin to notice the reactions around you. People who once praised you now find your silence strange. Those who admired your lightness now call you distant. Authenticity has a price, and it exacts its toll on the closest relationships. It's easy to be accepted when you follow the script others expect. It's difficult to remain loved when you decide to write your own. But it is precisely there that the spirit is tested. Courage lies not in shouting your truth, but in upholding it when the world rejects it. Some distance themselves, others try to convince you to return to what you were. The discomfort you cause is a reflection of the discomfort they avoid in themselves. Human beings fear what is free, because the freedom of others forces them to see their own prison. Have you noticed how most people prefer predictability to mystery? How they fear what they cannot control? Authenticity awakens this. It is unpredictable, alive, impossible to domesticate. And when that happens, the question arises, is it worth paying the price of loneliness to live truthfully? This question resonates deeply because nobody wants to feel isolated. But there is a fertile solitude. It is not born from rejection, but from coherence. When you decide to remain true to yourself, even if it costs you company, the emptiness that once hurt becomes a space for creation. And in that space, something new is born, a serenity that does not depend on approval. People confuse authenticity with selfishness. They believe that living for oneself means disregarding others. But the truth is the opposite. Only those who know themselves can offer something genuine to the world. How could someone who lives on appearances be a source of true love? Everything that is disguised, sooner or later, reveals its weariness. And when the mask falls, what remains is what always was, the being in its essence. Have you ever wondered how many of your choices were guided by guilt? How many words did you say just to avoid conflict? How many gestures were made to be accepted, and not because you believed in them? With each concession, a part of you fades away, until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize your reflection. It is at that moment that authenticity imposes itself, not as an option, but as a necessity. There comes a point when the soul, tired of pretending, prefers the risk of truth to the safety of appearances. This point marks rebirth. It's when you understand that being understood isn't a priority. Being whole is. That pleasing others isn't a duty. Being honest with yourself is. That remaining true to what you feel is the only form of real respect. But this understanding doesn't arrive as a sudden enlightenment. It's born from the pain of losses, the silence of ruptures, and the confrontation with everything you pretended to control. And then, something unexpected happens. When you stop fighting for acceptance, you begin to be recognized for who you truly are. People who previously distanced themselves return, or others emerge, different, more genuine. Life responds to authenticity with presence. What seemed like loneliness transforms into connection. What seemed like loss reveals itself as liberation. Ultimately, understanding this means realizing that authenticity is not a luxury, it's a moral necessity. Being true to yourself is the only way to live in peace. And the peace that comes from consistency is unshakable because it doesn't depend on anyone. But the question remains, are you willing to forego applause in order not to lose yourself? When you begin to live authentically, something subtle and powerful is revealed. The separation between you and the world begins to disappear. It's as if the boundary between what is internal and what is external dissolves, and everything begins to breathe at the same rhythm. In this state, what once seemed like coincidence becomes synchronicity. People appear at the right moment, phrases arrive as answers, and improbable situations happen, as if life, finally, has begun to speak your language. Many call this destiny. I call it alignment. When you are in harmony with what is, the universe ceases to be an adversary and becomes a partner. A Japanese scientist once discovered that water molecules change shape according to the emotion they are exposed to. Words like hate or anger created chaotic patterns, while love and gratitude formed harmonious, crystal-like designs. Even if some question the methodology, the idea is symbolic. Internal vibration shapes the world around you. If even water, which makes up a large part of who we are, responds to intention, imagine what happens when you live in coherence with what you feel. Things stop resisting you because you stop resisting them. One morning, a man told me he had lost everything: his job, his marriage, his friends. For months, he felt defeated. Until one day, while walking aimlessly, he saw a bird land on a power line. The bird sang as if nothing else existed beyond that moment. In that instant, he realized he didn't need a reason to keep going. He simply needed to be present. A short time later, he found a new direction, not because something miraculous happened, but because his perception changed. When consciousness aligns, life responds. The mystery lies not in the facts, but in the gaze that learns to see them. Perhaps what we call a miracle is simply reality, revealing its natural order to those who have finally stopped fighting. Have you ever wondered why the greatest transformations happen in the moments when you surrender? When control dissolves, life reorganizes itself. It's as if the river, once dammed by fear, begins to flow again with strength and clarity. Nothing in the universe remains still. Everything flows. Everything adapts. When you recognize this, you understand that rigidity is a disguised form of fear. There is also a profound wisdom in the improbable. History shows that many of humanity's greatest advances were born from mistakes, accidents, and setbacks. The telescope arose from the curiosity of a lens maker. Penicillin was born from the carelessness of a researcher. and countless reunions of souls began with painful partings. Life rarely follows the plan we draw up, and yet, almost always, it takes us where we need to be. It's not coincidence, it's invisible coherence, the order that only reveals itself to those who have learned to trust. Have you ever noticed how the most significant events seem to happen when you're ready, even if you don't know it? It's as if the universe awaits the exact moment when your heart opens to something new. What we call luck might just be synchronicity with the present moment. When you cease resistance, time seems to conspire in your favor. People, places, and ideas connect like pieces of a puzzle that has always been there, waiting for your perspective to mature. Ultimately, what all this reveals is simple. Life is not a series of coincidences, but a constant dialogue. And this dialogue only becomes clear when you learn to listen. To listen to yourself, to listen to the silence, to listen to the subtle movement that exists in everything. Understanding arises when the internal noise ceases. And at that moment, you understand. You were never separate from anything. It was only fear that created distance. When it dissolves, the whole world becomes a mirror. What you see outside is only a reflection of what you have learned to accept inside. There comes a moment when everything you believe to be solid begins to dissolve. The certainties that once supported your path crumble, and the world seems to change color. There is no warning, no manual, just the feeling that something that has always been dormant awakens. It's a silent call, almost imperceptible, but impossible to ignore. At that point, life places you before the mirror and asks, what is still real? And that's when the truth begins to emerge, not as a sudden revelation, but as a constant unfolding. Everything that was hidden by the illusion of security becomes transparent. You realize that control never existed, that fear is merely a reflection of the resistance to accepting the natural flow of things. When this awakening begins, the initial impulse is to flee. The mind, accustomed to patterns, tries to reconstruct the old world. You seek familiar routines, predictable people, ideas that keep you on familiar ground. But nothing fits anymore. It's like trying to go back to sleep after seeing the light of day. Consciousness doesn't recede, and that's where the real challenge begins. Staying awake. Because awakening is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of the crossing. The discomfort that arises is not punishment, it's purification. Everything that was false needs to crumble so that the essential remains. A woman once told me that after years of following a perfect script, stable marriage, solid career, healthy children, she woke up one day with a simple question. Is that all there is? This small, seemingly harmless doubt was the trigger for a silent revolution. In a few months, she realized she was living more to maintain an image than to truly live. She began to change small habits. She read books she had avoided, silenced empty conversations, and started walking alone. Gradually, the fear of loneliness turned into a taste for company. And when she finally stopped running away from herself, she discovered that she lacked nothing. Have you ever felt this? That feeling that everything you've built doesn't completely belong to you? As if you followed a map you didn't draw? It's in that moment that heart and reason wage their noblest battle. The mind wants to return to the comfort of the known, but the heart insists on the risk of truth. Conflict is inevitable, but it is within it that the self is forged. It's when the fear of the unknown transforms into curiosity. It's when the pain of leaving the past gives way to the lightness of existing without disguises. There is a sacred tension in this process. The old pulls, the new calls, and between the two lies an almost invisible point, the present. Remaining at this point requires courage. Courage not to rush, not to justify oneself, to simply observe what transforms. Those who manage to remain in this balance begin to realize that chaos is merely the disguised birth of order. What seemed like destruction was simply the necessary rearrangement for something more authentic to emerge. This is where the turning point happens. You realize you're no longer trying to improve life. You're trying to understand it. And, in understanding it, you discover there was never anything to fear. Change doesn't come to punish. It comes to liberate. Everything that seemed like noise transforms into melody. And when the sound of life becomes clear, you understand. Awakening is not an event, it's a state. It begins when you accept what is, and continues each time you choose to remain true to your own truth. There comes a point when understanding ceases to be merely an idea and transforms into practice. It is at this moment that learning becomes life. Everything you have heard so far serves not to adorn thought, but to guide action. True transformation happens when knowledge descends from the mind to the heart and begins to guide every choice, every gesture, every silence. The decision to be true to one's own truth is not something one makes once. It is a daily, discreet, and constant commitment. It is the act of waking up each morning and remembering that the only real duty is to be true to oneself, even when the world insists on suggesting otherwise. Life doesn't change because circumstances become easier, but because you learn to act consciously within them. Spiritual maturity begins when you understand that you don't control the wind, but you can adjust the sails. This requires presence, a firm, lucid, and at the same time serene presence. You don't need grandeur to live with purpose. You just need attention. When you learn to be fully present in what you do, even simple tasks take on a different brilliance. Washing dishes, listening to someone, taking a deep breath, everything becomes an exercise in presence. It is in this simplicity that wisdom resides. Many wait for the right moment to change. They want security before choosing, guarantees before committing. But life offers no promises, only opportunities. Waiting for everything to align before acting is like wanting to learn to swim without getting in the water. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is movement despite it. Transformation begins the moment you take the first step, even without certainty of what will come. And the curious thing is that when that step is taken with truth, the path appears, not because the world changes, but because the perspective changes. I tell you, nothing is more liberating than living without needing to prove your own worth. When you understand that you owe nothing to anyone but your own conscience, peace settles in. This peace doesn't depend on applause or recognition. It comes from the silent alignment between what you think, feel, and do. Coherence is the temple where the spirit rests, and this rest is not inertia, it is clarity. The clarity that allows you to choose without haste, act without guilt, and move forward without fear. Perhaps you're still wondering, how do I apply all this amidst the chaos of daily life? Start small. Observe yourself before reacting. Breathe before responding. Ask yourself honestly, is what I'm about to say or do true to who I really am? If the answer is yes, proceed. If it's no, be silent. It is in that instant that life reorganizes itself around you. Each act of awareness creates a thread of order in the fabric of the world. And the more you live like this, the more the universe responds in synchronicity. The journey of choosing oneself is not about perfection, but about returning to the point of origin, to calm, to lucidity, to presence. It is understanding that nothing is separate, that what you seek outside is merely a reflection of what needs to awaken within. And when this perception takes hold, fear loses its power. Doubt dissolves, and silence becomes your guide. Now, look within and realize how far you've come. Transformation isn't about what you've achieved, but about what you've understood. If this content resonated with you, share your thoughts, even anonymously. Your words can reach someone who hasn't yet awakened. Leave a comment, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. Every gesture is a way to continue this conversation, a conversation between consciousnesses that have finally decided to choose themselves.